Straight Edges, Chapter 5, In the Beginning God Created, Part 1. We don't get very far along in life before we run into a question that any sensible person wants to have answered, like any 3-year-old, and 3-year-olds are some of the most sensible people I know with their brains uncluttered by protocols and precedents. That first sensible question is, of course, why? Why? Has anyone ever needed to train a 3-year-old to ask a continual stream of whys? Nope, no training required. Wanting to know the whys of things seems to come naturally. 3-year-olds have managed to figure out what some genius discovered and named the law of cause and effect, probably through trying to answer his 3-year-old's queries. Roughly stated, the law says, for every effect, there is a cause. Kids have it figured. Everything they see around them is effect, and do they ever feel a need to learn the cause? It doesn't take very long for us to realize that there are causes behind things. There's an interesting thing about that first sensible question, though. The problem with it is that there never really seems to be any final answer. Have you noticed? No matter what answer you come up with to tell the 3-year-old, the next question is always the same. Why? And that's because no matter what cause you come up with to answer the first effect, that cause seems also to be an effect, and there always seems to be another cause lurking behind that one. What 3-year-olds have discovered is the seemingly infinite chain of causes. I say seemingly infinite because there is one answer that I've found to stem the tide of ceaseless whys and buy a person a few minutes of peace. Because that's the way God made it. Oh. 3-year-olds also seem to grasp that the first cause at the beginning of the chain of causes needed no cause and needs no explaining. He is what he is. He did what he did. Period. End of statement. End of whys. When you get to God, the buck stops. Is because that's the way God made it a cop-out answer or a necessary sanity saver, or is it a statement of simple fact? The title for this chapter is the Bible's bold statement of cause and origins in Genesis 1:1, the very first words in the Bible. In the beginning, God created. Here we have our first introduction to a creator God, the great cause. And just how did God create? Then God said, "Let there be," and there was, and it was so, and God saw that it was good. That's how he did it. At least, that's what Genesis tells us. But what does science tell us? That's the question the man or woman on the street will want to know as soon as this topic of origins and first causes arises. Likely, I'm not the right person to try to answer that question, but I'll give it a shot. For a start, as mentioned, science is based on the idea that all effects have a cause. And when we look at the world around us, we see one giant effect. Science tells us that the universe, the way we know it, has not always existed. There are a few different angles of approach to the question of the eternity of our universe, and all of them return a negative answer. I'll explain a couple of them. First, there are the laws of thermodynamics, which tell us, loosely translated, that energy cannot be created or destroyed. And by that it means that energy cannot be created or destroyed by anything inside of nature. Of course, a natural law can hardly be expected to dictate to anything outside of nature. But that energy is constantly turning into entropy, unusable energy. The main implication of the second law, which we see acted out all around us every day, is that everything is heading steadily downhill toward a maximum state of disorder. So if there will be a maximum state of disorder one day, that means at one time there was a maximum state of order. There was a starting point. I mean, in plain English, if there will be an end, there must have been a beginning. You can imagine a beginning with no end. The reverse is not logically possible. Try to imagine an end with no beginning. It doesn't work, does it? If a thing has an end, it must have had a beginning. There are various other scientific evidences that have caused scientists now to embrace the idea that our universe had a beginning, a singularity in science speak. That singularity has been popularized under the name the Big Bang. I'll briefly mention one other piece of evidence here as a concept almost simple enough for me to wrap my head around: the expansion of the universe. Observations in the past decades seem to tell us that the universe is expanding, stretching out like the skin of a balloon being inflated. All points of reference, like dots on the skin of the expanding balloon, are apparently moving out away from each other. This next part isn't rocket science, so follow me here. If the tape could be rewound so that we could watch the balloon deflating, we would see the universe moving in on itself toward a common center. That can only happen so long until everything meets, at one spot. That spot or time, which scientists call a singularity, a beginning point. There are a few other reasons that scientists have come around to deciding there must have been a Big Bang or a starting point for our universe. The others are a little too complicated for me to handle. The two I've mentioned are convincing, to me at least, all on their own, that our universe had a beginning. So if the universe is an effect, if our universe had a beginning, where does that leave us? That leaves us, according to the laws of cause and effect and thermodynamics, agreeing that the universe must have had a cause which can create energy, a cause outside of observable nature. Doesn't it? In light of the information I've given you so far, it seems to me that this would be the sensible thing for science to say. The universe is an effect, therefore the universe had a cause. This cause is something outside the universe that existed before the universe. In that case, science will not be able to make any statements as to the cause of the universe. Science studies the universe and its components, not anything beyond. Is that what science is content to say? Although there is little disagreement now on the opening bit that our universe is an effect, the second part has somehow become open to scientific debate. Is it possible to have an effect without a cause? That's the question. Take a look at the third sentence in the official statement, kind of a press release maybe, that I wrote for science. This cause is something outside the universe that existed before the universe. Does that third statement have to follow on the heels of the first and second? Yes, it does. That third is the logical implication of the first and second premises. If the cause of an effect does not exist, at least in some form, outside the effect and before the effect, then we're talking about self-causation. We're talking about something coming from nothing. We're talking about an effect with no cause. If we're talking about our universe as a self-causing effect, we're talking about our universe popping into existence out of absolute zero, absolute nothingness. 1 minute, though before minutes exist, of course, absolutely nothing exists. The next minute, absolutely nothing explodes and our universe begins to exist. Astonishingly, this is the kind of idea that science is beginning to take seriously. The other ideas that science is beginning to take seriously are ideas about natural causes for our universe outside of our universe and its natural laws. Scientists have begun to propose ideas about, something, a kind of multi-universe producing superspace that had no beginning, that is eternal, uncaused, and self-existent. If self-causation doesn't happen, then something or someone has always existed in order for anything to exist. I won't dive headfirst into any of these scientific speculations here. I don't need to. I stand by the closing lines of my press release for science. Science will not be able to make any statements as to the cause of the universe. Science studies the universe and its components, not anything beyond. Shouldn't it go without saying? In this discussion, I have no intention or ability of refuting all the various whimsies passing themselves off as science that the most precursory glance must reveal can never move past the realm of pure speculation. All I really want to say about them is, why? Our old sensible question again. Why are scientists now being driven, or driving themselves, into realms of pure speculation? I think when we answer that question, we'll see something enormously revealing about humanity at large. And when we see that enormously revealing something, we can get our investigation into the existence of God underway on a much sounder footing. Why have scientists begun toying with notions that can never move past speculation? For one simple reason. A science has decided that it must be able to explain everything, in terms of natural causes. Rather than take the sensible route of admitting, science will not be able to make any statements as to the cause of the universe. Science studies the universe and its components, not anything beyond. Most scientists are determined to leave no room for the supernatural anywhere. And the reason for that determination is simple and terribly revealing. The majority of us does not want there to be a God. One day I found myself in discussion with a friend about this topic of origins. My friend was arguing against the Bible's position, and I was arguing for it. He knows more about science than I do, and I wasn't making a very good showing for my side. But I realized after I thought it through later that the discussion wasn't about science at all. It was about philosophy. It was about what both of us wanted to believe. It was about bias. I had a bias, that's obvious, but my friend wasn't supposed to have one. As the non-religious person, he was supposed to be the honest, open-minded searcher after truth, fearlessly following it wherever it would lead him. But the one thing that came clear to me after I pondered the conversation in retrospect is that he wasn't at all interested in searching after truth in the direction from where I was coming. He was as unwilling to let go of his beliefs as I was to let go of mine. When it came to this matter of origins, suddenly we were no longer two friends discussing a subject of mutual interest. We were two combatants, willing to fight to the death rather than give in to the other. I want to believe in God, I admit it, but my friend did not want to. We do indeed make choices about what we'll believe. We believe what we want to. But don't we all decide on our beliefs based on the likelihood of their being true? Don't we believe what we believe because those beliefs look like the most reasonable options to us? Perhaps, sometimes, but not when biases, our want-tos, enter the picture. And from my observation, the general population has a very strong bias against a belief in God. Because nothing can ever be proven beyond all unreasonable doubt, as we saw in Chapter 2, if there's one loophole left in the case for God, one tattered shred of hope left in the case against God, people will cling to their philosophies and speculations like a drowning man clinging to a splinter of wood. Isn't it odd when you think about it? Why are people desperate to get around the existence of God? Can you admit it if you're in that position? If you've rejected the possibility of him, why don't you want to believe in him? Admitting a bias is the first necessary step to suspending it long enough to see things clearly. So if you can admit a bias and suspend it for a moment or two, let's use our observational skills to see which way would the evidence lead us, God or no God. Is there evidence of intelligence back of the natural order? Earlier this evening, I was fascinated by reading a child's wildlife encyclopedia. It got into describing the amazing things animals do just by instinct. Things like the architectural marvels built by sponges and spiders, and the migrations of birds and monarch butterflies, and the food dance of honeybees. There's a type of sponge that builds a tower-like structure for a skeleton, and this tower is an intricately designed work of art. By sponge, yes, I mean the life form that lives in the sea, kind of like the colorful squishy thing that wears square pants, except of the genius variety. If you've never heard of these sponges, you should look up Venus flower basket sometime. Hard to think of a sponge as having the mental ability to do that kind of thing. Its engineering skills have baffled scientists, but, does the thing even have a brain, and where would it keep it? This is what occurred to me while reading. You know what instinct is? Instinct is simply derived intelligence. At all levels of nature, we find creatures instinctively doing things that smack of intelligence. But we can be sure that the intelligence these creatures display is far beyond their own. Instinct is just another way of saying intelligence that comes from another source. The complexity and intricacy and functionality and knife's edge balance at every level of nature scream out to me of the existence of a creator. Apparently, these facts don't scream out that same message to everyone. Or do they? Do some stop their ears and look for loopholes? Are there any imaginable, never mind believable, explanations that could account for how all our realities that seem to bear witness to an intelligence back of them, a designer and creator, could have come to be without one? Yes, there's an imaginable explanation. And now it's time to examine what I see as one of those loopholes in the case for God, one of those tattered shreds of hope in the case against him, one of those splinters of wood clung to by the desperate. Just calling it like I see it. When it first came out, it took the world by storm. After all, it was science telling us that if it couldn't disprove God's existence outright, at least it could do away with the necessity for him. It could make him redundant. Science had provided a purely naturalistic explanation for everything. This revolutionary, exciting new idea was this, that everything could have come to be all on its own through millions and billions of years of gradual changes acted upon by a force called natural selection or survival of the fittest. After all, didn't science show that everything changed gradually over time? And didn't science show that only the fittest survived? Like the science speculations I mentioned earlier that I'm not here to refute, my main aim this chapter will not be to demonstrate conclusively how evolution couldn't have happened the way we're told it did. My first main point is this: what's more likely, that God exists or that he doesn't? And my second main point is this: people have a strong vested interest in answering that question in the negative. The thrill Darwin's ideas, their main point being to provide a purely naturalistic explanation for everything, gave the world, and their hearty acceptance by the world, show us that. We all have our biases. Once we put our biases aside, on which side rests the stronger weight of evidence? That's all I'll hope to demonstrate this chapter and the next.